Okay, hey, hi. Tell you what, going to turn down the music. Yeah, let's just turn that down a bit. There we go. So it's a bit more manageable and livable. Yeah, so welcome tonight, those of you that are able to make it, and also to those of you that are catching this later on, because I noticed like 100 and some odd or a couple of hundred people to catch this later on. So thank you for that too as well. And please, by all means, don't forget, like, leave a comment, just what you think and your thoughts. I appreciate everybody's interaction and what you have to say and what your thoughts are on the whole process. So, yeah, I won't beleaguer the everything too much. I'm just going to get right into it. Yeah, so tonight, once again, hazard identification, assessment, and control. But what we're also going to talk about is the formal hazard assessment. no tux required. Formal meaning it's put in place. There's a plan. There's a purpose behind it. And the other way to think of formal, as a colleague of mine says, it has a form. So yes, there's going to be a form to fill out, and we'll talk about the different forms. But right now, let's get into the chat rules. So, of course, participate. Introductions are nice. Who you are, where you're from, what you do. Even if you want to include how long you've been involved in health and safety, that's fine too. It's appreciated. The other thing is ask and answer questions. Ask me or ask somebody within the chat. That's fine too, or in the comments. That's all fine. Purpose behind this is to create a community and collaborate, meeting of the minds per se. Because not all of us are experienced in every facet of first aid safety. Believe it or not, I'm still learning. I am. I've been involved in this for about 3 decades now, and I'm still learning. So yes, your knowledge and opinions count, and I want to hear from you. But be civil. No name calling, no insults, no trading barbs, okay? It's okay to have disagreements. It's okay. We're going to do that. That's just the way it works. It doesn't matter. I've seen it lots through my career. But be civil and be professional about it. The other thing is, this is not professional advice or a formal class. Okay, yes, there's a structure to it, and there's a little quiz at the end, but it's not a formal class, and neither is it professional advice. I can give you suggestions, but there's no money or contracts, money changing hands or contracts being signed. So, really and truthfully, it's, how should we say, just a live stream. But anyway, as we go further, for those of you that haven't been through the process before, the process is simple. Going to do a recap of previous episodes. Also, there's going to be a presentation and a lecture. Presentation is length is going to depend on questions and interaction, but hopefully not longer than 45 minutes. And of course, if there's questions in the chat, I'll answer them. But also, there's going to be a short quiz, 5 or 6 questions at the end. And yes, once again, answer those chat questions. And any comments or questions that get asked from an episode afterwards in the comment section, like when it's just being played on YouTube, I'll answer those in the subsequent episodes. Okay? So, without further ado, let's just talk about what we talked about before. So from the start, we defined a hazard. Like, what is a hazard, situation, condition, or thing that has the potential, may be dangerous or has the potential to be dangerous to people or objects, assets, etc. And so there's many definitions. We talked about the fact that there's many definitions in your jurisdictions. Make sure that your definition within your health and safety management system aligns with your legislation, or make sure it aligns with your workflow at a minimum. We also talked about categorizing and classifying hazards and it's important because if you don't classify hazards and categorize them right off the hop and identify them correctly, you're not going to apply controls correctly. Okay, that's just it. It's a no-brainer. It's as sure as I'm sitting here. Okay, and yeah, I'm still sitting here. Okay, now we talked about the differences between risk, hazard, and consequence, ensuring that you know the difference. Everybody needs to know the difference, because one of the mistakes that gets made is people will confuse, especially a hazard and consequence. They will look at a hazard, instead of saying hazard is overexertion, exposed to sharp edges, exposed to radiation, exposed to harsh chemicals, whatever, they will say things like cuts and bruises and burns are the actual hazard. And they're not. It's what caused that cut, scrape, bruise, burn, etc. Okay, the hazard is exactly that. The consequence is different. It's that cut or injury. Now, the other thing is they often confuse risk. I can remember asking a bunch of cabinetry students once, what's your greatest risk using a table saw? And they all said, well, cutting our fingers off. And I said, no, what, how, like, look around. Who's got cut fingers? Well, nobody had fingers that were cut off, not even their instructor. But what they did notice after we had some discussion is one of the things that they're doing often is lifting material up onto the table saw, up onto the deck of the table saw. So they quickly figured out their greatest risk is an injury due to overexertion from manual materials handling or awkward postures. Yeah. And then we also talked about quantifying the risk. In other words, giving risk a number, giving it an actual value. So it's not becoming, and if you give it a numerical value, then what happens is the risk is no longer your opinion, it's quantified. And then if you're quantifying risk, you get the opportunity to prioritize it and consider what you're going to look after first. Because the biggest thing is you want to apply controls to either eliminate, which is a control, eliminate the risk altogether, or significantly reduce it so that work can take place. And so that's what we've been exploring thus far in the video. So, I know, you're thinking to yourself when it's time to do that hazard assessment and fill out that form, great, but we have work to do. Why do we have to waste time writing about it? We know our work is dangerous, or it may have hazards involved. Why do we have to waste time writing about it? And hey, fair question. But realistically, if you're not looking at the hazards involved with the tasks you're performing, are you going to be able to apply those controls? You always need to get in and study something. And what a hazard assessment is it's a procedure designed to identify, assess, and manage health risks and safety hazards in the workplace. So a lot of times we will bring our own personal history, our own personal experience to a job. And so the hazards that we've been exposed to are the ones that we've noticed are the ones we're going to think about. We might not think about all of them. And that's why if we have that meeting of the minds, other like people who are doing the same job, meeting together and identifying all of the tasks we perform and then associating the hazards with those tasks and then assessing them for risk and then applying controls. That's the whole point behind it. Because I know why. I hear employers shouting at me as I hit this slide. But the thing is, let's look at the recent video I did, and I'll leave a link in the description, or I can pop a link in the chat if people are interested. But it showed a thumbnail of me with my hands on the bars and on jail bars. But if you think about it, if the employer had have taken the time to note all of the hazards involved with the tasks that that young employee was going to be performing, and then assessing them for risk, and then applying controls to the riskiest ones first, working their way down the plan, maybe, just maybe, that young fellow would be alive today. So I know time is money and you got work to do, but if you don't do this now, people get hurt. Or worse, people die. So, let's look at the legal aspect, okay? Here in Alberta, there's legal requirements. The employer is required to look after the health and safety of all of the workers engaged in the work of that employer, the workers that are not engaged at the work but present at the work site at which that work is being carried out. But here's the other one. Other persons at or in the vicinity of the worksite whose health and safety may materially be affected by identifiable and controllable hazards originating from the worksite. So look at that, those words, identifiable and controllable hazards. That's huge. Identifiable and controllable hazards. So if you're not doing the job of identifying the hazards and assessing for risk and then applying controls, are you, as the employer, abiding by the legislation? And realistically, that's what it says here in Alberta. We could go through a myriad of different jurisdictions, but all of them are fairly close to the same. The employer's got to identify hazards and then assess them for risk and apply controls so that work can continue safely. Let's look at another example. In the US, it's pretty, and I like them, they're really simple. It's basically the same as all over Canada and the US, but it's pretty straightforward. Okay, provide a workplace free from serious recognized hazards. Now, for those of you that are in other jurisdictions, other countries, etc., do me a favor, pop it into the chat or into the comments what your country or jurisdiction says about the employer's responsibility where around hazard identification and assessment. I'd like to hear from you. But realistically, workers are usually have the right to go to a workplace and not have to worry about, well, dying, right? So it's plain risk management too, when you get right down to it. It is. Okay? Peter Drucker said it well. In business, the first order of business is not to maximize profit, but to minimize loss. Okay? So you want to minimize that loss. The potential for loss, if not checked, will lead to loss. So find the gaps, plug the hole. It's that simple. That's simple risk management. Okay? It's like risk management 101. And believe it or not, you increase learning. Or earnings, pardon me. Not learnings, but, well, maybe you do. But, think about it this way. Less insurance costs, because when you're keeping your loss down, your premiums are also stay low. So less insurance costs, less lost time, less training requirements. Honestly, it should be a no-brainer, you would think. Okay? And then, of course, the liabilities, because you may have increased difficulty obtaining financing. You might have contractor avoidance. You might also have difficulty even obtaining insurance after, because it's not unusual for insurers to cancel policies based on significant loss history. And one of the things that happens when you go and try to get insurance is you have to declare if you've been denied insurance by another insurer before. Okay? So try thinking about it like this. Or if need be, that you need to sell the process, explain it like it's addressing that from an enterprise or organizational risk management perspective. Wouldn't it be prudent to identify the different duties for each position, and from those the various tasks, considering the hazards and risk for each, and then considering the controls? That idea being, are you truly identifying and controlling risk in the organization? Because if you are, or if you aren't, you're not looking at the human resource aspect. You're not looking at the employees and how they're performing, if that's the case. Because if people are performing to their utmost, to their nth degree, then you know what? They're going to be doing so because they're not worried about harm. They're not looking over their shoulder. And they're not being skittish about getting onto a scaffold or a platform that they think might collapse. So just some things to think about, employers or senior managers. Okay? Now, I know you want to know how. And the idea is you break each position into a job. And so each position or job is one thing. Like we think about carpenter, drywaller, janitor, roofer, etc. All sorts of different positions. But then what are the duties that they have? And then what are the tasks to fulfill those duties? And once we assess those, we can then assess them for hazards and then apply controls. So look at it this way. Each job needs to be managed. What are the obligations of that position? To properly manage the job, it's important to understand the duties or what's expected of and what are the responsibilities of each position. And so another way to think about it is if they're responsibilities, duties that are being performed, what are those tasks, the accountabilities of each position? So if you're to think of the job as an obligation, then the duties is the responsibilities. The tasks become the accountabilities, or what you check off at the end of the day saying that you've lived up to those responsibilities. So like understanding that relationship, and I hope I haven't complicated anything, but we need to drill down, but not too granular. One of the things I've found with organizations is they get right down to almost actions, flexing the arms and bending at the waist and whoa. Those are natural physical movements. We don't have to look at that. We need to look at the tasks. Like say, for instance, with the janitor, floor maintenance is going to be part of it. So cleaning the floors, running the auto scrubber, filling the mop bucket, mixing cleaners, etc. All of those are tasks for that position. Okay? So yes, you need to drill down, but not too far. So the biggest mistakes, like I said, is drilling down too far. Go granular, but not into the minutia. Okay? So like when we're considering duties, we want to look at it this way. Let's say a laborer at a construction site would be responsible for delivering building materials or moving them. So a task might be manual materials handling or moving material, doing inventory, etc. Versus lifting up 2x6s onto a cart. You know what? That's a bit much. Okay? Or because using that cart would be an engineering control for that task. Or a carpenter building a house might be responsible for form assembly, but not lifting and lowering the plywood sheets or hammering the nails. That might be the use of hand tools as the task. Okay? Have I lost anybody yet? Does that seem reasonable? Okay? So tasks, not actions. Not bending at the waist, not flexing at the arm or anything like that. So before we get started, let's just do a quick review so that you can understand the process. I'm sort of deviating from the process a bit, maybe, with a bit of a lengthy review, but you'll see why in a bit. The idea is the journey's as important as the destination. So understanding that a control will nullify or significantly reduce the potential for the negative effect of a hazard exposure. So once again, think of a hazard as something that has the potential for negative effect on anyone or anything it interacts with, injury, illness to people, damage to property, etc. So that being the case, a control is essentially anything or process that nullifies or significantly reduces that potential for that negative effect on anyone or anything it interacts with by directing or guiding it to redetermine the behavior, if you will, or the direction of that unwanted force. So when we get into controls, we think about how we're going to control it. And let's talk about, and there's the hierarchy of controls. We have elimination. So once again, eliminating the hazard, not eliminating the risk, eliminating the hazard. Okay? Or essentially eliminating the potential for the exposure to the hazard. This also might require some modification of the task. And then, of course, substitution. A lot of times people think of elimination and substitution as the same thing. I'm not going to get into that argument. To me, they're two separate things. But if you want to think of them as the same, that's fine. Just realize one thing. If we eliminate the hazard, but we substitute the hazard, we're still going to have to do a risk assessment on it. So just something to consider. The risk assessment is just going to be different. Okay? And once again, substitution is substituting the hazard for something less hazardous. Think about using a severely caustic cleaner or oxidizer or something like that, and can you switch it out for something else and use mechanical aid? Engineering controls are basically establishing a barrier between the exposed worker and the hazards, and it has to be as close to the hazard source as possible. So think of guarding on a moving blade, for instance, but also engineering controls can come in the form of interlocks, so something has to be engaged before that action can take place. It also could look at isolation and moving the worker further away and putting that barrier in between the hazard and the worker. Administrative controls are different. They're anything that influences, directs, or guides worker behavior. And that could be anything from all of a sudden brain farts, sorry. Anything from signage, workers wear hearing protection beyond this point, that's an administrative control. Backup beepers on a machine, whistles, bells, etc. A fire alarm going off is an administrative control. But they can also be training, instruction, and safe work procedures, safe work guides, etc. All of those are administrative controls. And then finally, PPE, the lowest on the hierarchy, and because it requires 100% worker involvement, it wears out, it's directly attached to the worker, for want of a better term. It's worn right next to the worker. And it does minimize the effects of exposure to the hazard, but it's not as effective as any of the previous controls. Now, if substitution occurs, substituting the hazard therefore has altered the task, which still needs to be assessed, and that's one of the key mistakes a lot of people make. They think that once you've substituted the hazard, there's no need to assess it anymore, but the hazard's still present. Okay? So, during this process, there's an order to the operations. You identify the hazards, you assess them for risk, you implement controls, and then you reevaluate. Follows like the Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act. Okay? So, now, where do you find out all of those tasks? You have to understand the work. And lots of times job descriptions are a really good place to start, because job descriptions shouldn't outline all the tasks. If they do, they're too long and laborious. But they should contain duties. And out of those duties, you're going to look at, because that's responsibilities, you're going to look at the accountability of the tasks. What the worker checks off in the day. The other thing that also is a good resource is job postings. Okay? But above all and beyond all, the best source for information when compiling a hazard assessment is the actual workers that perform the tasks. Get them involved. It does a few things. Number one, it boosts your safety culture. Involvement and participation boosts the safety culture. Number two is they're the ones that are intimately involved in the work, and they can provide you with a better idea of the hazards that are involved. The other thing, number three, is it increases hazard awareness. Okay? If you're in Alberta or anywhere in Canada, all workers have the right to meaningful participation in the safety activities and the work that they're doing. So if you're involving workers, guess what? You're giving them that meaningful participation and satisfying one of their rights. And then beyond that, think about your industry partners. Whether you have certifying partners involved in core, or whatever the case may be, or industry partners like, say, for instance, the Alberta Construction Safety Association here in Alberta, the Continuing Care Safety Association, or the Alberta Municipality Health and Safety Association. There's lots of different industry partners out there, and look for them in your jurisdiction. They can also help you. But anyway, let's dive in and look at just a simple hazard assessment to get started with. So you see here, and I apologize if this is too small. I do. But there was a big form, I had to fit it in here somewhere. But it's a simple hazard assessment outlining, and here we are outlining the tasks, which in this case, just a couple of them for a drywaller. It's not all the tasks, it's just a couple. Think of it this way, when you identify tasks, then the hazards associated with the tasks, then you implement controls to reduce the risk. So in this case, we got a job that's a drywaller. And one of the duties, of course, is moving the drywall from here to there, moving materials. Okay? And so the next one is, and this is doing his job as a drywaller. So not just the installation, but we're going to be moving the materials. And this is done regardless of the job site. Doesn't matter where you are, you're still going to be moving materials because it doesn't magically move to where it is. Now, you can also share tasks and share your findings once again, because if you do this, maybe let's say, for instance, the carpenter, the framer is going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be moving materials, and you might need to do the same thing. So you can intersperse those tasks provided the hazards are the same and the controls are the same. If you're adding or subtracting controls either way, then honestly, if you're taking less controls and reduced hazard to somebody that has more of a hazard with the tasks they're performing, requires more controls, you're not doing it a good service. Okay? And then after manual materials handling, another task, and often I call it hanging drywall, but we're going to have to call it installing drywall with drill and screws. Because, yes, you can glue drywall. I think it absolutely blows doing that, but I know there's likely cases where it works better. But, yeah, I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a drywaller. I'm not a framer. I just have done a little bit of it in the past. And I've been involved in health and safety and housing construction. So I've added these two as tasks. So that's the first piece. You look at the duties that they're performing and then identify the tasks out of them. Then the next step is determining the hazards that are involved. So moving materials has the following hazards. We have overexertion, because no matter what, we're all going to lift too much. I just got a shed delivered, and both boxes together, each box weighed like 180 pounds. It's a vinyl shed. So it's huge, but I had to undo it, unpack it, and then move all of the stuff into the backyard. There's no back alley. And so I unpacked it, and I was still packing it. And you know what? No matter what, I'm almost 60, and I'm still overloading myself. So that's going to happen. Okay, it's a hazard. Awkward postures are a hazard because we've got to bend down and pick the stuff up. We've got to bend down to put it down, etc. Awkward postures. There might be exposure to sharp edges. There might be tripping hazards, and there might be struck by because you might be dropping that object. So a part of your body is going to be struck by an object. So those are hazards, right? And that's just with the manual materials handling. But what about when we look at hanging the drywall? Now, there is definitely likely going to be overexertion, awkward postures, but also struck by an object, maybe exposure to sharp edges as well, and falling particulate. Now, if I've missed hazards, by all means, let me know in the chat or the comments. By all means, please, let me know. I see people have been coming and going, so please let me know. And because that's what it's all about, is many minds, and the hive mind produces good effects. So let's talk controls, shall we? So now, moving materials, or manual materials handling if you want, requires the following controls. Now we can add, and what we do is we go through and we consider all of the controls using the hierarchy of controls. Now, if you look, there's something wrong here. Now, it doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things, but ideally, I've got use mechanical aids, dollies, carts, etc. So great on engineering controls. But I've got wear gloves and follow safe work practice. Uh-oh, I should actually have looked at the follow safe work practice first, then wearing the gloves. However, in the big scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. And once again, if I've missed anything, please, let me know in the comments, okay? Please, I appreciate it. And I didn't get too granular because the purpose here is to, just define and show you the process more than anything else, okay? Anyway, when we're installing the drywall, hanging the drywall, if you will, there are some things that we can use to get rid of that awkward posture and being bent over and overexertion. So we can use drywall stands, the hoists, jacks. Drywall jacks work really well. You just put the drywall on them and boop, they work excellent. We also would need PPE, gloves, glasses, or footwear, but something else I should be looking at too. Maybe there should be a safe work procedure in there somewhere, right? So the final finished product would look like this, okay? And this is just a simple job hazard analysis. This is a simple one. Now, realistically, this method will fulfill the requirements in most jurisdictions. It will fulfill the requirement here in Alberta. But it doesn't necessarily meet best practices. So if you're doing something like going for the certificate of recognition, per se, then you need to be calculating risks so that you can provide the ability to prioritize risk by quantifying it. Okay? So, on that note, let's crank it up a bit of a notch here. So just as a quick review, remember, you want to quantify risks. So consider the frequency, how often you are performing the task, exposed to the hazard, not performing the task, but exposed to the hazard. Is it daily? Give it a value of 4 if it is. Is it weekly? Then give it a value of 3. Is it monthly? 2. And then, of course, annually is 1. Okay? Then look at the severity, the probable loss. Okay? Not worst case scenario loss, because worst case scenario doesn't necessarily manifest. What is the obvious probable loss? Now, if it's inconsequential, like and there's no zeros, if it's inconsequential, like a near miss where nothing happens, it's a 1. If it's a treat and return to work, oh, got to give them a Band-Aid, ice pack, whatever the case may be, and return to work, then you know what? It's a 2. Okay? But if we've had to send them to the hospital and they're going to return to work, it may be a while, but it's going to be back in the previous state. They're not going to be disabled in any way, shape, or form. Then it's a 3. But if it is life-altering, whether they have a permanent disability or an ongoing disability or worse, a fatality, permanent damage, then it's a 4. Okay? So looking at this one, and this is another one, it's a simple process, but it expands. It's very similar to what we did, but it fulfills the best practice approach to classifying the hazards and quantifying the risk. So, whoops, sorry, got ahead of myself. So we look here, we got moving materials, so we've got the overexertion, awkward postures, but if you notice, they're kind of grouped now, okay? And see, the idea is try to group physical hazards, chemical hazards, biological hazards, etc., wherever you can. Or group hazards of a very similar nature, overexertion and awkward postures. So that makes perfect sense. Exposure to sharp edges. Once again, also makes very sense to be taken away from overexertion and awkward postures. They involve carrying versus cutting. Tripping hazards, and then struck by an object. So then, we also look at installing the drywall using drill and screws. Once again, overexertion and awkward postures grouped together, struck by an object, exposure to sharp edges, and falling particulate in the eyes. Okay? So then we can look at, and what we do is we go a step further here. We're looking at the hazard classification so that we can better understand the hazard to better apply controls. And I just used a simple one here for totaling up, but we got physical, everything is physical with the exception of something in the eyes could be physical and chemical at the same time, depending on what gets in the eyes. If you've ever got gyprock dust in your eyes, it's super painful. But then quantifying everything, and if we look, we have physical is a 3 for the frequency and a 3 for the severity for a medium hazard. We have 2 and 2, 1 and 2, 2 and 2. 3 and 3, once again, for the physical, for the overexertion and awkward postures. 1 and 2, but 3 and 3 for exposure to sharp edges, and 2 and 2 for eye protection, for the eye injuries. So then, once again, we're putting in controls wherever possible, and we've got like egress maintenance program for tripping hazards. We've got using safe work procedures, mechanical aids, etc. So the idea is we're considering each hazard and looking into it and quantifying it for risk. And then what we do is with that priority, we're able to look at what we're going to deal with first. What are low hazards? What are medium? What are high hazards? Do we need to revise those tasks? Right? So here's what the whole thing looks like, and it's and now I didn't. There's more, and I will do a future live stream where we're using a more advanced hazard assessment form, and how it not only calculates the risk, but it also recalculates risk after the controls, because it gives the controls a value as well. So it's just one way to think about it, one way to do it. And I will do a separate live stream on that later on. So very similar to what we did, but it fulfills that best practice approach by classifying the hazards and quantifying the risk. So when we qualify by quantification, okay, and once again thinking, is it a low hazard? Well, we've got a value now. It's not Kevin's opinion, because Kevin's opinion doesn't matter. As my grandmother used to say, a tinker's dam. It doesn't matter, okay? But when we start to quantify things, then it brings about results. Medium is 4 to 6 with this scale that I just used. And of course, high is 7 to 8. Okay? But once again, it's no longer an opinion. And that's the important piece. So hazard assessment is also not a one and done. It's a continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is what drives a successful hazard identification, assessment, and control program. In fact, it's what drives a successful and a high-reaching health and safety management system. Yeah, like you're going to have people that are good, you're going to have people that are better, but you'll very rarely have those that are best. Best are the ones that are wanting to exercise those best practices, that want to do better. We should all be striving for that, because then we would have injury-free workplaces and we wouldn't have 20-year-old young men dying. So, on to the quizzes now. What is a simple hazard assessment? Well, no, let me rephrase that. On to the quizzes. Why is a simple hazard assessment not a best practice approach? Is it A, it's too simple? B, it doesn't look at all the controls? C, it doesn't quantify risk and allow for prioritization? Or D, it doesn't classify the hazards? Okay. And the answer is C. It doesn't quantify risk and allow for prioritization, so it's not a best practice approach. Next question. What type of hazard would chemotherapy be, or would chemotherapy drugs be? Now think, there's a hint there in chemo, but is it A, biological, C, chemical, or pardon me, B, chemical, C, physical, or D, none of the above? And the answer is chemical. Okay. So, next question. What type of control is signage warning workers to use hearing protection? Is it A, PPE? Is it B, an engineering control? Is it C, an administrative control? Or is it D, all of the above? And the answer is, and Dan, if you're watching this, sorry, I didn't put the music in, I'm sorry. But the answer is C, administrative control. I'll try to get to music next time. After assessing a task for risk, you note the quantified total is very high. What should you do? So you've hit like 8 or 9 or something like that, like it's a max total. Should you eliminate the position due to the risk? So that's it, we're going to fire the guy, that's it, it's too risky. Or should we B, review the task and consider altering the task? C, add more controls? Or D, none of the above? And the answer is, review the task and consider altering the task. Next question. What type of control is an electronic light-activated welding helmet? Is it A, engineering control, B, mechanical control, C, administrative, or D, PPE? Now, whatever you do, don't get swayed by the electronic light-activated, because what is this helmet doing? We're wearing it next to the worker, right? So the answer is D, PPE. What is one advantage of an intermediate hazardous or risk assessment where we're quantifying the risk? Is it A, it looks more thorough, like it impresses everybody because it's so full of numbers? Or is it B, just numbers impress everyone? Or is it C, that it's not anecdotal, it's more factual, and it's not opinion driven? Or is it D, none of the above? And the answer is, It's C. It's not anecdotal. It's more factual, not an opinion. So, are there any questions? I see that people have come and gone. So that's fine. If not, load your questions into the comments. I appreciate comments, and I do answer all of them. I do get to every single comment that I receive. So by all means, ask them in the comments, and I'll answer them in future subsequent live streams. By all means. Yeah. So what's up next? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to kick it up a notch with the formal job hazard assessment. Like I said, going to show you a different one that not only identifies or looks at the tasks, identifies the hazards, but also after you've implemented controls, the controls have a value to them. So it reassesses the risk afterwards to help you better prioritize, but also think about the tasks. I'll also include the use of a risk matrix in it as well. Now, on that note, it's going to take a bit to prepare, and I got a couple of meetings next week. So depending on my time and how it works out, I might not have a live stream next week, but I'll give everybody a quick update if that's the case. Either in the community tab, so keep an eye on that, or I'll throw up a quick update video. Throw up an update video. Didn't sound too good. So once again, questions and comments will be answered in subsequent episodes or live streams. But, yeah, looking like I don't have any questions coming in. And you know what? If you're local or if the weather is the same way it is here right now, I can't blame you if you're sitting out in your sun deck enjoying a cold beverage. Honestly, I can't, because it's a beautiful evening out. So do me a favor, will you please? Take the time when you're at work to consider hazards. Provoke safety, okay? Be that person that's going to be the safety leader. You don't need to have a title. You don't need to have a designation. You don't need to have anything. All you have to do is want to work safely, doing that right thing at the right time, regardless of who's watching or who might object, okay? So be that safety leader. Provoke safety, okay? Take care. Bye for now.